It was a typical Saturday night, and I had been driving for Uber for a few hours. The night had been pretty slow so far, and I was starting to think about calling it a night. But then I got a ride request from a bar downtown. As soon as I pulled up to the bar, I could hear the music blasting from inside. The place was packed, and there were people stumbling out of the door, laughing and yelling. I spotted my rider leaning against the wall outside, and I could tell right away that he had been drinking. "Hey man, you're my Uber, right?" he slurred, stumbling towards my car. I nodded and unlocked the doors, and he got in the back seat. He smelled like he had been drinking for hours, and I could see that his eyes were glassy and bloodshot. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He gave me an address across town, and I started driving. At first, he was chatty and friendly, telling me all about his night at the bar. But as we got further away from downtown, he started getting quieter and more subdued. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that he had his head leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. I assumed that he had fallen asleep, but then he suddenly sat up and started muttering to himself. "You okay back there?" I asked, glancing back at him again. He just grunted and didn't say anything else for a few minutes. But then he suddenly sat forward and grabbed the back of my seat. "Hey man, can you pull over for a sec?" he asked, his voice urgent. I could tell that something was wrong, so I pulled over to the side of the road. He stumbled out of the car and started puking on the sidewalk. I winced and rolled down my window, trying to avoid the smell. "You okay?" I asked, feeling a bit grossed out. He wiped his mouth and stumbled back towards the car. "Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered, climbing back into the back seat. I didn't want to continue the ride with him smelling like vomit, so I asked if he wanted me to cancel the ride and get him a new Uber. No, I'm good," he insisted, slurring his words. "Just take me home man." So I continued the ride, trying to ignore the smell and the fact that he seemed like he was going to puke again at any moment. We finally arrived at his destination, and he stumbled out of the car, fumbling with his wallet to pay me. "Thanks man," he mumbled, handing me a wad of crumpled bills. I counted the money quickly and saw that he had given me a generous tip, probably to make up for the mess he had made in my car. I thanked him and drove away, grateful that the ride was finally over. As I drove home, I couldn't help but think about how strange the night had been. I had never had a passenger puke in my car before, and I had never seen someone go from chatty and friendly to silent and sullen so quickly. But then again, I guess that's just part of being an Uber driver. You never know what kind of passengers you're going to get, and sometimes, things can get pretty weird. A few days later, I was driving for Uber again when I got another ride request from the same rider. I recognized his name immediately and hesitated for a moment before accepting the ride. I wasn't sure if I wanted to deal with another drunken mess, but I needed the money, so I decided to give him another chance. When I arrived at his location, he stumbled towards my car, looking just as drunk as he had the last time. He got in the back seat and gave me the same address as before. This time, he didn't say much during the ride. He just sat in the back, staring out the window. I could see him swaying slightly as we drove, and I wondered if he was going to be sick again. But then he suddenly spoke up. "Hey man, sorry about the other night," he said, his voice slurred. I glanced back at him in the rearview mirror. "It's okay," I replied. "Just try not to puke in my car this time, okay?" He chuckled weakly. "Yeah, sorry about that. I don't remember much from that night, to be honest. I was pretty wasted." I nodded, not sure what else to say. We drove the rest of the way in silence, and when we arrived at his destination, he stumbled out of the car, mumbling a thank you as he went. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. He seemed like he was going through some tough times, and I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. Over the next few weeks, I got several more ride requests from the same rider. Each time, he seemed a little less drunk and a little more coherent. We started talking more during the rides, and I learned that he had just gone through a messy breakup and had been drowning his sorrows at the bar. I tried to offer him some words of encouragement, telling him that things would get better and that he just needed to give it some time. He seemed to appreciate the advice, and I could see him starting to open up more each time we talked. Eventually, I got a ride request from him that wasn't at a bar or a club. This time, he gave me the address of a job interview he was going to. He seemed nervous as we drove, but I tried to give him some words of encouragement. "You got this," I said, as I dropped him off. "Just be yourself and give it your best shot." He thanked me and got out of the car, and I watched him walk nervously towards the building. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as I drove away, knowing that I had played a small part in helping him turn his life around. A few weeks later, I got a message from him on the Uber app. He had gotten the job he had interviewed for, and he wanted to thank me for all the rides and the encouragement. "Thanks man," he wrote. "I couldn't have done it without you." I smiled as I read the message, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I had been able to help someone in need. It was a strange and unexpected turn of events, but it just goes to show that sometimes, the most unlikely situations can lead to unexpected and positive outcomes. I had been driving for Uber for a few months when I got a ride request from a woman named Claire. She had requested an Uber XL, which meant she needed a larger car, so I pulled up in my minivan and waited for her to come outside. When she emerged from the building, I could see that she had several large bags with her. She looked a little flustered as she approached the car, and I could tell she was in a rush. "Thanks for coming," she said, as she climbed into the front seat. "I'm running a little late for my flight." "No problem," I replied, as I started the car. "What's the destination?" She gave me the address of the airport, and we started driving. The traffic was heavy, and we were moving slowly. I could tell she was getting more and more anxious as the minutes ticked by. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to make conversation. She let out a deep sigh. "I'm just so stressed," she said. "I'm heading to a wedding in Hawaii, and I have so much to do before I leave. I've been running around all morning, trying to tie up loose ends." I nodded sympathetically. "Weddings can be stressful," I said. "But once you're there, you'll have a great time." She smiled weakly. "I hope so. I just feel like everything is going wrong today." As we continued to drive, she started to open up more about her life. She told me about her job as a lawyer, her recent breakup with her boyfriend, and her struggles with anxiety. I listened to her story with interest, trying to offer words of encouragement and support whenever I could. By the time we arrived at the airport, she seemed much more relaxed and at ease. "Thanks for listening," she said, as she got out of the car. "I feel so much better now." I wished her good luck on her trip and drove away, feeling like I had made a real connection with a stranger. A few weeks later, I got a message from Claire on the Uber app. She wanted to thank me for the ride and the conversation, and she asked if I would be willing to drive her to the airport again when she returned from her trip. "Of course," I replied. "Just let me know when you're back in town." As it turned out, she got back late at night, and I was the only Uber driver available to pick her up. When I arrived at the airport, I saw her waiting outside the terminal, looking tired and jet-lagged. "Hey Claire," I said, as she climbed into the car. "How was Hawaii?" She let out a deep sigh. "It was beautiful," she said. "But it was also really hard." I looked over at her, sensing that something was wrong. "What happened?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I went to the wedding with my ex-boyfriend," she said. "We had broken up before I left, but I didn't want to cancel the trip. I thought it would be okay, but it was just really hard being around him again." I could see the tears starting to well up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, not sure what else to say. She wiped away the tears and took a deep breath. "It's okay," she said. "I just needed to get it off my chest." As we drove, she started to open up more about her feelings. She told me about her regrets, her hopes for the future, and her struggles to move on from her past. I listened to her story with empathy. As we continued to drive, the conversation shifted to more light-hearted topics. We talked about our favorite books, movies, and TV shows, and shared stories about our families and friends. However, as we got closer to her destination, she became more and more quiet. Finally, we arrived at her apartment building, and I helped her with her bags. As she was getting out of the car, she turned to me and said, "Thank you so much for the ride. I really appreciate it." I smiled at her. "No problem, it was my pleasure. Have a good night." She closed the door and started walking towards the entrance of her building, but then suddenly turned around and ran back to the car. She opened the door and leaned in, her eyes filled with fear. "I need your help," she whispered. "I think someone is following me." My heart raced as I looked around, but I didn't see anyone suspicious. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes, please, you have to help me," she said, her voice shaking. Without hesitation, I got out of the car and locked the doors. "Okay, let's go," I said. "I'll walk you to your apartment." We started walking quickly towards the entrance, but as we got closer, I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows. My heart pounding, I stepped in front of her protectively. "Who are you?" I demanded. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a man with a menacing expression. "I'm her ex-boyfriend," he said. "And I want her back." My blood ran cold as I realized that we were in danger. I reached for my phone to call the police, but it was too late. The ex-boyfriend lunged forward, and we struggled in a violent altercation. Finally, we managed to break free, and I pushed her into the apartment building. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, and she sprinted towards the elevator. I turned back to face the ex-boyfriend, who was still charging at me. My heart racing, I braced myself for another attack. But then, out of nowhere, a squad car pulled up, and 2 police officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Freeze!" they shouted. "Put your hands up." The ex-boyfriend hesitated for a moment, then slowly raised his hands. The officers quickly subdued him and handcuffed him, and then turned to me. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. I nodded shakily. "Yes, thank you." They took the ex-boyfriend away, and I walked back to my car, feeling shaken and scared. As I drove away, I couldn't help but think about how easily that night could have turned out differently. If I hadn't been there to protect her, who knows what might have happened. I used to work as an Uber driver a few years back, and I have had my fair share of strange and creepy experiences while driving passengers around. But there was one ride that stood out from the rest, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. It was a Friday night, and I was driving around the city, hoping to pick up some passengers. After a few minutes of waiting, I received a ride request from a woman named Rachel. The pickup location was a bit far from where I was, but I decided to accept the ride anyway. I arrived at the pickup location, and Rachel came out of the building. She was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with curly brown hair and a tired look on her face. I greeted her and asked where she was headed. "To the airport," she said, getting into the back seat. "I have a flight to catch." "Sure thing," I said, starting the car and heading towards the airport. The ride was quiet for the most part, with only occasional small talk from Rachel. But as we got closer to the airport, she started to get fidgety. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course not," I said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Have you ever had a passenger who was, dangerous?" she asked, her eyes wide. I was taken aback by her question. "No, I can't say that I have," I replied. She sighed, looking relieved. "I'm sorry. It's just that I've been feeling really anxious lately, and I can't shake this feeling that something bad is going to happen." "I understand," I said, trying to reassure her. "But don't worry, you'll be at the airport soon, and everything will be okay." We arrived at the airport, and I pulled up to the drop-off area. Rachel got out of the car, but before she left, she turned to me. "Thank you for being a good driver," she said, giving me a small smile. "I hope you have a good night." I watched as she walked into the airport, feeling a bit uneasy about the whole ride. There was something off about Rachel, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As I was driving away, my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Hey, can I ask you a favor?" it read. "Sure," I replied, wondering what she could possibly need. "I left my phone in your car. Can you bring it back to me at the airport?" I groaned, realizing that I would have to turn around and go back to the airport. But I didn't want to leave Rachel without her phone, so I agreed to bring it back to her. I parked the car and headed inside the airport, looking for Rachel. I found her waiting outside of the terminal, looking more anxious than before. "Thanks for coming back," she said, taking her phone from me. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," I said, starting to walk away. "Wait," she called out, stopping me in my tracks, "can you please stay with me for a bit? I don't feel safe here." I hesitated, but something about Rachel's plea made me stay. We sat down on a bench, and she started to tell me about her life. She had just gone through a messy breakup and was still feeling scared of her ex-boyfriend. "He's been stalking me for weeks," she said, her voice shaking. "I had to leave my apartment and come stay with a friend. But I can't shake the feeling that he's still following me." I felt a sense of compassion for Rachel and understood her fear. I offered to call the police or find someone to help her, but she refused, saying that she didn't want to involve anyone else. We talked for a while longer, and I tried my best to reassure her and make her feel safe. But as time passed, I started to feel uneasy myself. There was something about Rachel's behavior that was starting to make me question her story. "Why don't you call a friend or family member to come and be with you?" I suggested. "I don't have anyone," she replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm all alone." I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew that I couldn't stay there forever. I tried to gently tell Rachel that I had to leave, but she clung on to me, begging me not to go. "Please stay with me," she said, her voice becoming desperate. "I'm so scared." I tried to calm her down, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, I decided to call a friend who worked as a security guard at the airport. He arrived quickly and was able to escort Rachel to her gate. As I watched them leave, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But that feeling didn't last long. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They asked me about the ride I had with Rachel and whether anything strange had happened. I told them about her anxiety and her fear of her ex-boyfriend. They informed me that Rachel's ex-boyfriend had been found dead in her apartment, and they had reason to believe that she was involved. They asked me to come down to the station to give a statement. I was shocked and terrified. Had I been in the car with a murderer? Had I put myself in danger by staying with her at the airport? I went to the police station and gave my statement. They assured me that I was not in any danger, but I couldn't shake the feeling of fear and unease that had taken hold of me. To this day, I still think about that ride and what could have happened if I had made a different decision. It taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious, even in seemingly innocent situations.